In this program, we'll introduce you to the jointer. We'll describe all the parts and controls of the jointer and how they affect what operations can be performed. We've included some helpful safety information and a demonstration of how to operate the jointer. The jointer is basically a planing machine that does many of the same jobs that a hand plane does, only faster. All jointers are basically the same design. The only real differences between different models are the size and the power. The jointer gets its name because it's designed primarily to joint or plane the edges and faces of materials so that they can be glued or joined together. Sometimes jointers are mistakenly called planers, but this is not quite the right term since they're used primarily to smooth edges of stock and not wide surfaces. The jointer can be used to smooth the surface of a board, but the result is stock without consistent thickness. A thickness planer is better suited for evening the thickness of a piece of stock. The jointer can be used for jointing the edges, ends, or faces of stock. It can also be used to joint a warped piece of stock. In addition to simple jointing work, the jointer can also do rabbeting, beveling, chamfering, and taper cutting. These operations require careful planning and setup of the fence. In furniture and cabinet-making shops, jointers are indispensable since they can be set up easily for production work. Although they're optional machines in general wood shops and home shops, there are many basic jointing operations where they will pay for themselves in time savings. Carpenters and other construction workers use jointers to produce sash, door parts, and window frames. Maintenance shops, wood builders, school shops. Jointers are just about as common as the table saw in many shops. The jointer is a machine deserving respect and care to prevent injury. The cutter head rotates at great speed and can potentially cause serious injury, including loss of fingers. But as long as you avoid coming in contact with the cutter head, you're pretty safe. Kickbacks are a possibility, and jointers produce a good deal of noise and dust, so eye and ear protection are mandatory. We'll cover more on safety later. The jointer has very few parts and controls. The base is usually a heavy structure that's bolted to the floor or to a heavy bench. Stock is positioned on the table and pushed across the cutter head for jointing. The table is divided into two parts, the infeed table or front table and the outfeed table or rear table. Table adjustment controls are used to position and secure the table for proper jointing operations. Jointers often have a scale on the infeed table, indicating the depth of the cut. In between the tables is the cutter head and cutter head guard. The cutter head is a wide cylinder with straight cutter knives mounted in slots. Jointers have from 2 to 5 cutter knives, with 3 or 4 most common. The entire cutter head assembly rotates on sealed ball bearings. The knife blades slice off very thin, short sections of stock. The cutter knives are replaceable and are positioned to line up level with the outfeed table for most operations. The cutter head guard covers the entire cutter head and fits down close to the table surface as well. The guard is spring-loaded so that it slides to the side as stock is pushed against it. Then, as the stock goes by, it springs immediately back over the cutter head. A fence is mounted alongside the tables for guiding stock across the cutter head. The fence adjusts from side to side so that stock can be positioned at various positions over the cutter head. And the fence also tilts for angle cutting with stops at 90 and 45 degrees. The fence locking lever or knob secures the fence in the desired position. The motor on most jointers is mounted below the table and connects to the cutter head through one or more V-belts. The on-off switch is mounted in a convenient location and functions like any other woodworking machine. Jointers are available in various sizes ranging from 4 to 16 inches wide. This is the width of the cutter head and corresponds to the widest boards which may be jointed. Because most shops use the jointer mostly for edge work, the maximum width is not all that important. But a wider jointer can offer a little more flexibility, especially when doing rabbeting. Now, most shops have jointers that are 4, 6, or 8 inches. The length of the table is also important. The longer the table, the longer the stock that can be properly handled on that machine. Motors for jointers range from 3/4 horsepower for smaller benchtop jointers to 5 horsepower for large floor-mounted jointers. The motor has to have adequate power to take a fairly wide cut because of the design of the cutter head. Speed has two meanings for jointers. The speed of the cutter head describes how fast the knives rotate. Speeds range from 3,600 to 7,000 RPM. Cutter heads can leave small ripples or mill marks in the stock because of the way they shave the wood. In general, faster speeds produce smoother surfaces, or smoothness can be improved by selecting a cutter head with more knives. The feed rate is also important because this can change the number of cuts per inch. Jointers are fed manually, so the feed rate is entirely up to the operator. To get smoother edges, the operator can simply feed the stock at a slower rate. Cutter head blades are precision-sharpened steel knives that are mounted into the cutter head with adjustable screws. Now, the knives should be razor sharp to perform properly. Service on these units is very difficult. All service operations and cutter head adjustments should be done only by qualified technicians. You should use great care when operating a jointer. Always make sure the power is disconnected before adjusting the settings on the jointer. Power cords and extension cables should be carefully selected to match the amperage rating of the motor. Get help to handle long or awkward stock and avoid any loose clothing that might get caught up in the machine. Here are a few additional safety rules to keep in mind. Get permission to use the jointer. You must secure permission from the shop foreman each time you want to use the jointer. Protect yourself with proper eye, ear, and dust protection. Jointers put out lots of fine chips. Use a dust collection system and wear a dust mask. Take care to protect your hearing and vision as well. Adjust the jointer properly. Always check the depth of cut and fence position before performing any jointing operations. Never move the fence while the cutter is in motion. Jointers can remove a maximum of 1/8 inch from the edge of stock or a maximum of 1/16 inch from the face of the stock in a single pass. Use the cutter head guard whenever possible. The cutter head should be covered by the guard whenever it's possible. Some rabbiting operations require the temporary removal of the guard, and be sure to replace the guard immediately after you're finished. Do not joint stock that's too short. Stock must be at least 12 inches long and 2 inches wide for most jointing work. Inspect the stock carefully. Never joint stock that has knots, checks, or cracks. You should also avoid stock that has been painted, varnished, or that might have nails or screws in it. Feed the stock with the grain in the right direction. Feed stock with the grain pointing in the proper direction. The grain should point down and back from the cutter head. Feed the stock properly. Never allow your fingers to be above or near the cutter head. If you never run your hands above the blades, you'll never come close enough to cut them. In order to do this and still have control of the board being jointed, please follow these steps. Hold the stock on the infeed table with both hands. Carefully push the stock into the cutters. Reach each hand over the cutters as you feed the stock through, and keep one hand on the stock at all times. You should try this method first with the power turned off so you can get the proper feel for placing your hands and moving the stock across the table. Stand to the left side of the board. Stand to the left side of the wood as you feed it into the jointer. Although kickbacks are rare, you should always stand in the proper place. Use pushers for thin or narrow stock. If you must joint stock that is thin or narrow, use a push stick or block. Your hand should never be placed lower than the top edge of the fence. And maintain a clean work area. When you've completed the work, turn the machine off and remain at the jointer until it comes to a complete stop. Clean up all dust and chips. In this section of the program, we will demonstrate how to use the jointer. Make sure the power cord is disconnected before making any adjustments to the jointer. Next, check the fence for proper position and for squareness. Make sure the cutter head does not come into contact before you tighten the fence locking lever. Inspect the stock to be jointed and decide how deep to make the cut. Set the depth of cut from 1/16 to 1/8 inch. Make sure the lock bolt is loose before you try to adjust it. As you adjust the height of the infeed table, let it go down below the desired cut, then bring it back up to the desired depth. This should help to eliminate the position from settling from vibration. Make sure the lock bolt is secured before operating the machine. Protect yourself with the proper safety gear. You must notify the shop supervisor before turning on the jointer. Make sure the top of the jointer is free of any materials and stand to the left side of the jointer. Turn on the power and wait for the cutter head to come up to full speed. Inspect the stock and check for the direction of the grain. It should point down and away from the cutter head. Place the stock on the infeed table and against the fence. If you're jointing the edge of the stock, the face should be placed against the fence. If you're jointing the face of the stock, you should place the edge against the fence. Carefully pass the stock over the cutter head at a uniform speed. Keep the stock secure against the fence and the rear table. Remember to keep your fingers above the top of the fence and never place your fingers directly over the cutter head. Reach each hand over the cutter head one at a time as the stock travels over the blades. Examine the jointed surface and run the stock through again until the edge is smooth and straight. When you're done, turn off the jointer motor and wait until the cutters have come to a complete stop. Clean up all dust and chips. Let's take a minute now to review the basic safety rules for operating the jointer. Get permission to use the jointer. Protect yourself with proper eye, ear, and dust protection. Adjust the jointer properly. Use the cutter head guard whenever possible. Do not joint stock that is shorter than 12 inches or more narrow than 2 inches. Inspect the stock carefully. Feed the stock with the grain in the right direction, down and back from the cutter head. Feed the stock properly. Never run your hands over the cutters. Stand to the left side of the board. Use pushers for thin or narrow stock. And maintain a clean work area. The jointer may not be a required tool in the wood shop, but you can make most of your jointing work a breeze if you have one, and it won't take long before you get consistent results from this labor-saving machine. Until next time, remember to have a safe and productive woodworking session.